Here's a modified and engaging version of part 1 of your 10-part mystery horror story, written in simple American English, aimed at a 30-minute YouTube video audience. The tone is immersive and suspenseful, suitable for American listeners who enjoy historical horror and psychological mysteries. Titled The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, Part 1, The Boy from the Burned Camp. In the frozen winter of 1867, tucked away in the remote mountains of what was then Colorado Territory, something happened that has baffled scientists, doctors, and historians for over 150 years. This isn't just a campfire story, it's a documented mystery involving a child named Samuel Henderson, just 9 years old, who predicted a disaster 3 days before it happened, saving 17 lives in the process. How did he know? Why did the government try to bury the story? And what really happened in the isolated town of Pine Ridge? Some say it was a miracle. Others believe something much darker was at play. If you're new to this channel, we tell the stories that others are too afraid to uncover. If you're ready to dig into one of the strangest, most chilling cases in frontier history, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from. Because once you hear what Samuel Henderson saw in the mountains that winter, you'll never forget it. The town of Pine Ridge! Pine Ridge wasn't much more than a dot on the map back in 1867. Just over 300 people lived there, settled high in the Colorado mountains, 8,000 feet above sea level. It was surrounded by thick pine forests, freezing winds, and long winters that cut the town off from the outside world for months. The town had started only a few years earlier in 1864 when a stern but kind preacher named Reverend Jonathan Matthews led his followers west from Missouri. They were tired of the chaos and sin they saw spreading across the eastern states. They wanted to build a pure Christian town, one where neighbors looked out for each other, where families prayed together, and where kids learned the Bible alongside their ABCs. At the heart of Pine Ridge was a simple wooden church, built from pine and stone, with a bell that echoed through the valley every Sunday. And standing by that church every morning was Reverend Matthews himself, grey-haired, strong and calm. Folks said he could look you in the eye and see straight into your soul. This was a place where people believed in faith, community, and hard work. But faith alone wouldn't be enough to prepare them for what Samuel Henderson would bring into their lives. One of the first families to join Reverend Matthews was Thomas and Margaret Henderson. Thomas was a skilled carpenter. He built the schoolhouse, many of the homes, and even carved the pews in the church by hand. Margaret was the town's healer and midwife. She knew more about herbs and natural medicine than most doctors. She grew plants behind their cabin, everything from pain relievers to herbs that helped during childbirth. But for years, the Hendersons had one heartbreak they couldn't fix. They couldn't have children. Margaret lost 3 babies early in their marriage. Each time, the whole town grieved with them. But still, they prayed. Every Sunday, every night. And then in the spring of 1858, their prayers were answered. Just not in the way they expected. Aye, the discovery! Thomas had gone hunting deep in the woods, farther than he usually went. There had been signs of deer tracks near an old path close to where a small Ute camp used to sit. But when he arrived, he found something else entirely. The camp was in ruins. The shelter had been burned. The ground was torn up. And around the remains, he found 3 bodies, adults, shot and stabbed. It wasn't just a raid. It looked like someone had been searching for something. And then beneath the burned camp, hidden in a small root cellar, he heard a faint sound, a whimper. Inside, wrapped in a buffalo hide blanket, was a toddler, maybe 18 months old, alive, cold, but alive. The boy didn't cry. He just stared at Thomas with wide, dark eyes. A secret decision. Thomas knew what he was supposed to do. Report the attack. Send word to the nearest US Marshal. But help was more than 100 miles away, and the trail would be long cold by then. More than that, he knew what life might be like for a child with native blood raised in a white town, especially in a time when tensions between settlers and native tribes were near breaking. So Thomas made a choice. He buried the dead, marked the graves, and took the boy home. He and Margaret told the town they had found an abandoned baby during a hunting trip. The community, believing it was an act of Christian charity, welcomed the child. They named him Samuel and baptized him 2 weeks later. Growing up different. Samuel grew up like any other child in Pine Ridge, or so it seemed at first. He helped his father with woodworking. He helped his mother pick herbs. He attended church every Sunday, just like the other kids. But strange things started to happen. He had terrible nightmares, waking up screaming in a language no one understood. He sometimes froze in place, as if listening to something no one else could hear. He would say things, odd things, that made no sense at the time, but would later turn out to be true. Margaret believed the boy had a gift. Thomas feared something darker. One night, when Samuel was just 5, he asked Margaret a question that chilled her to her bones. "Mama, what does it mean when the dead won't stop whispering?" The town starts to notice. As Samuel grew older, others in town began to notice his strange behavior too. He predicted when the first frost would come, weeks in advance. He warned one miner not to take a certain path to Silver Creek, saying he would fall. The man ignored him and broke his leg just where Samuel had said. Then came the incident that changed everything. In February of 1867, Samuel stood in the middle of church and said something no one could explain. 17 souls are standing at the edge of the dark. You have 3 days to bring them home. No one knew what it meant until 3 days later, when a snowstorm trapped a group of travelers between Pine Ridge and Silver Creek. Exactly 17 people, their wagon overturned, half buried in snow. If a rescue party hadn't been sent after Samuel's warning, they would have frozen to death. The mystery deepens. From that moment on, Samuel wasn't just a strange child. He was something else. A travelling doctor who had been passing through took notice. He would later dedicate his life to studying Samuel's case, writing hundreds of pages about what he witnessed. Local authorities got involved. A US Marshal even investigated the Hendersons for fraud, but came away convinced that something truly unexplainable had happened. Years later, letters and documents about Samuel would turn up in a Denver estate sale, buried in a box of personal journals and church records. That discovery would reignite the mystery and bring to light secrets that had been hidden for over a century. But those are stories for another episode. This was just the beginning. What happened next in Pine Ridge would divide the town, test their faith, and lead to a series of events so strange and horrifying that they were nearly erased from history. So if you think you're ready for what comes next, stay tuned for part 2 of the mystery of Samuel Henderson. And remember, some stories aren't meant to be told, but we're going to tell them anyway. Subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments what you would have done if you were in Thomas Henderson's boots that cold spring day in 1858. Here's part 2 of The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, rewritten in simple, engaging American English and structured for a 30-minute YouTube storytelling video. It picks up naturally from part 1 and builds suspense while deepening the mystery around Samuel. The pacing, tone, and character reactions are adjusted for clarity, tension, and emotional weight for an American audience. Title: The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, Part 2, The Prophecy in the Church. In our last episode, we met a strange boy named Samuel Henderson, found in the mountains as an infant and raised in the quiet, God-fearing town of Pine Ridge, Colorado Territory. He wasn't like the other children. He could predict snowstorms, find lost objects, sense sickness before it appeared. And in February 1867, he stood up in church and spoke with a voice that didn't sound like his own, warning of death, blood, and 17 souls in danger. Some called it a miracle. Others believed it was something far more dangerous. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that now. We tell the dark stories from American history that others are too afraid to touch. And let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's return to Pine Ridge. Samuel's gift grows stronger. Samuel had grown into a quiet, serious boy with dark hair and pale green eyes that always seemed to be watching, listening. He was small for his age, but his instincts were sharp. He could sense weather changes long before the skies shifted, often warning his parents to bring in firewood hours before snow began to fall. He could find anything: lost tools, missing buttons, even a neighbour's wedding ring buried under weeks of snow. The other kids in Pine Ridge thought he was strange, but not mean, just different. Adults were both grateful and a little uneasy. Samuel sometimes knew things he shouldn't, like when Mrs. Baker's newborn was in distress. He showed up at her door with Margaret Henderson's birthing kit before anyone had sent for help. Or how he knew which plants would ease a fever even before Margaret diagnosed it. Margaret joked that Samuel had spiritual sight, but deep down she was beginning to worry that it was no joke. By February 1867, Pine Ridge had been snowed in for nearly 2 months. No one had made it to Silver Creek, the mining town 20 miles down the mountain. Food was rationed, fires were always burning, and everyone stuck close to home, except Samuel. He spent long hours walking the forest trails alone. He said he felt calmer there. Thomas Henderson noticed his adopted son growing more distant. Not sad, just quiet, focused, as if he were hearing or seeing something the rest of them couldn't. On the night of February 17th, Samuel didn't sleep. He paced the small cabin, staring out the frosty window like he was watching for something. When Margaret asked what he was looking for, he didn't answer. The church service the next morning, Sunday, February 18th, was bitter cold. The kind of cold that freezes the air inside your lungs. Still, the people of Pine Ridge packed into the small Presbyterian church. 47 adults, 16 children. There wasn't much space, but there was comfort in numbers. The smell of pine pitch, wool clothing, and wood smoke filled the room. Reverend Matthew stood at the pulpit, preaching about the story of Job, about faith during suffering. He was a man the town trusted, a man who had built this place with his own hands and guided them through death, hunger, and fear. As the sermon reached its most powerful moment, Samuel, sitting with his parents in the third pew, stood up. The creak of the wooden bench cut through the silence like thunder. At first, everyone thought he needed to use the outhouse.
But then the prophecy.
The earth trembles beneath Silver Creek, he said, his voice calm, clear, and much older than his years. His pale green eyes stared straight ahead, not blinking, not moving. 17 shall be spared by the warning of the crow. When the sun reaches its highest point on the third day, the mountain shall swallow the greedy, and the silver shall run red with blood. The entire church fell into dead silence. People stopped breathing. You could hear the fire crackling in the stove. A gust of wind howled through the eaves, but inside no one moved. Then came words no one expected. Coca Policina, Machetu Wemby. To many in the room, it sounded like nonsense. But a few old-timers, men who had once traded with the Ute tribes, recognized the words. They weren't gibberish. They were fragments of an old native language spoken by medicine men during sacred rites. 7 souls walk in darkness, but the crow brings light to the shadow places where silver men dig their graves. Margaret reached for her son. He didn't react. It was like he couldn't see her. Samuel's breathing was slow and deep, his body stiff. His voice dropped to a whisper that still somehow echoed through the church. Tell the men of the deep places, when the sun stands still on Wednesday, let no man go beneath the earth. The mountain remembers the blood. It will feed on the children of those who disturbed the sleeping spirits. And then the final words. Wembe natai kishkai. The mountain spirits speak through the child who was born in shadow and raised in light. But the gift has a price. Each vision tears a piece from the seer's soul. The debt will be paid in silver and bone. Aftermath in the church. Samuel blinked. The trance vanished. He looked around and said in a small, confused voice, "Mama, why is everybody looking at me like that?" He remembered none of it. He didn't understand what he had said. All he knew was that something felt wrong. But the church, the people, they would never forget it. The reactions. The response was immediate and divided. Elder Marcus Blackwood, a strict fire and brimstone type who saw evil behind every corner, stood up and shouted, "That boy speaks with the tongue of heathens. No Christian child says such things unless he's been touched by wickedness. We must cast out this evil before it spreads to our own children." but not everyone agreed. Sarah Denton, whose brother worked in the Silver Creek mines, turned pale. She had heard a crow caw near her cabin that very morning, loud and insistent. It hadn't made sense at the time. Now she wasn't so sure. She wasn't so sure. Others were frightened but didn't know what to think. Was Samuel speaking the truth? A warning from God? Or had the devil slipped into their midst? What happened in that church was just the beginning. 3 days later, on Wednesday, February 21st, the prophecy would come true, and 17 lives would hang in the balance. In part 3, we'll travel to Silver Creek to learn what really happened in those mines. You'll hear from the men who were there and the terrible choices they had to make when the mountain finally opened its mouth. Subscribe now so you don't miss it, and tell us in the comments, if you had been in that church, what would you have believed? Was of the Mystery of Samuel Henderson, rewritten in simple American English for a 30-minute storytelling video. This part deepens the tension, expands on the town's reactions, and sets up the inevitable disaster, all while keeping the tone immersive and suspenseful for an American audience. Title: The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, Part 3, Waiting for the Mountain. In the last episode, a quiet church service in Pine Ridge was turned upside down when 9-year-old Samuel Henderson stood up and gave a chilling prophecy. He spoke of 17 lives in danger, of a hungry mountain, and of silver running red with blood. Now, with just 3 days before his predicted disaster, the town must decide what to believe and what to do. If you're new here, subscribe now. We bring you the darkest and most mysterious true stories from early American history. And let us know in the comments, would you have believed the boy? Now, let's return to Pine Ridge, where the clock is ticking. Fear spread through Pine Ridge. After Samuel's strange outburst in church, Pine Ridge changed. The boy had spoken clearly and calmly, predicting death and destruction with words that sounded both sacred and ancient. No one could forget the way his voice echoed, unnatural, steady, and far beyond his years. Whose brother worked in the mines at Silver Creek, couldn't shake what she'd heard. Samuel had said something about, and she remembered, that was the same day the Silver Creek mines always reopened after their monthly safety checks. She had heard her brother William talk about the dangers underground. The old timbers, the gas pockets, the thin walls of rock holding back death. And now this boy was saying the mountain was going to swallow the greedy.
Doubt, faith, and fear. Reverend Matthews
Was deeply shaken. He'd built this town on faith, hard work, and Presbyterian values. He'd seen hardship, sickness, famine, even death, but never anything like this. And now he was asking questions he had no answers for. Was God speaking through a child, or was something darker at work? The boy had spoken Ute words, or something like them, and that worried the Reverend. There had always been quiet rumours about Samuel's origins. He was found in a burned camp after a massacre, wrapped in a buffalo blanket. Was he part native? Was he touched by their ways? Old Willem Strauss, a miner with 40 years of experience, had heard those words before. Not clearly, not recently, but they rang familiar. He'd seen things in those mountains, old rituals, sacred places, burial sites that settlers were warned to stay away from. And he remembered the stories that some land remembers blood and some spirits never rest.
the doctor's observations.
Dr. Ezra Keller, a travelling physician in town treating winter fever, had been at the church when Samuel spoke. He'd seen seizures, hysteria, religious mania. He'd even seen men broken by war-speak in tongues. But this was different. Samuel's speech was coherent. It was calm. Too detailed, too sharp. Not the rant of a disturbed child. He began observing Samuel closely. The boy seemed normal. He laughed. He helped his mother prepare herbs. He played when the weather allowed, but every now and then he'd pause, just stop, and stare south toward the mountains where Silver Creek sat buried under snow. He'd ask if someone heard something, even though the house was silent. A community divided. As the days passed, Pine Ridge split in two. On one side stood Elder Marcus Blackwood, loud and unbending. He believed Samuel was a danger, a false prophet, or worse. No child of God speaks in heathen tongues, he said, quoting scripture and marching from cabin to cabin, warning parents to protect their children. He believed the boy needed to be sent away, or worse. People started locking their doors, watching their children more closely. On the other side stood a small group of women, Sarah Denton, Martha Caldwell, and others who believed Samuel's words might be divine. Martha had lost her son in a mine collapse 3 years ago. She wept openly during the church service. Now she believed God had sent Samuel to protect others from suffering the same fate. These women met in secret, praying for Samuel, asking God to guide and protect him. God uses the weak to shame the strong, Martha said. He speaks through children and the broken. Most of the town didn't know what to believe, but no one could ignore the tension. 3 people.
One choice, Jacob Miller.
The shopkeeper kept track of trade schedules. He knew that Wednesday was February 21st, the day the mines reopened after inspection. Sarah Denton, waiting for her brother to bring supplies, prayed he would come late, or not at all. Willem Strauss knew the signs of a dangerous mine. He'd seen good men buried alive, and he believed what Samuel had said. And yet, none of them sent a warning. Maybe they were afraid of looking foolish. Maybe they thought if this was God's will, it wasn't their place to interfere. Maybe they wanted proof, so they waited. And on Monday, Samuel played with the other children. On Tuesday, he helped Margaret dry herbs by the fire. But by Wednesday morning, something had changed. Margaret Henderson saw it first. Samuel was fidgeting. His hands wouldn't stay still. His eyes kept darting to the window. "Do you hear that, Mama?" he whispered. "It's quiet. Too quiet." He wasn't sick. He wasn't scared. But something inside him was waking up again. Margaret had seen animals behave this way before a storm. Restless, alert, nervous. Thomas tried to stay calm, but he noticed it too. The boy seemed like he was waiting for something. The whole house felt like it was holding its breath. Reverend Matthews spent those 3 days in prayer. He visited the Hendersons daily, watching Samuel, searching for signs of possession, illness, or God's hand. Samuel was polite, kind, thoughtful. He spoke nothing of his vision. But still, the Reverend couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. His theology told him to be cautious. His heart told him to listen. And yet, in the end, he too chose to wait. Thomas starts digging. Thomas Henderson wasn't a superstitious man, but something about all of this wouldn't let him rest. So he began asking questions, quietly. He spoke to older settlers, traders, and fur trappers who had passed through the area years ago. He asked about the place where he'd found Samuel, that burned camp so many years back. And what he discovered chilled him to the bone. That place had been known to the Ute tribes as sacred ground, a site for vision quests where medicine men sought wisdom from the spirits of the land. It wasn't just a camp. It was holy, and it had been violently disturbed. Blood was spilled there, one trader told him, and the land remembers blood. And then Wednesday came. The skies were clear. The winds were calm. But deep beneath the frozen ground of Silver Creek, something had started to shift. Next time on The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, we'll go to the mines. We'll hear what happened on February 21st, 1867, from those who lived and those who didn't. 17 men would be tested. And Samuel's prophecy? It would no longer be a question. Subscribe now so you don't miss part 4, The Collapse at Silver Creek. And tell us in the comments, if you had heard Samuel's words that Sunday morning, would you have actually? Here is part 4 of The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, written in simple, dramatic American English for a 30-minute YouTube storytelling video. This part covers the collapse at the Silver Creek mine, where Samuel's prophecy begins to unfold with terrifying accuracy. Title: The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, Part 4, The Collapse at Silver Creek. Intro: previously on The Mystery of Samuel Henderson. A 9-year-old boy stood in a church in the winter of 1867 and spoke of 17 souls, a crow's warning, and a mountain that remembered blood. He predicted death beneath the earth on a Wednesday. That Wednesday was now here. This is the day Pine Ridge would never forget. If you're enjoying this journey into America's darkest forgotten mysteries, subscribe now and tap the bell icon. Let us know in the comments, have you ever had a feeling something terrible was about to happen? Now, we travel to the frozen ridges of Silver Creek. The miners return. It was Wednesday, February 21st, 1867. The Silver Creek mine, one of the richest in Colorado Territory, had been shut down for 5 days for its monthly safety check. At dawn, men began showing up with pickaxes and lanterns. 17 of them entered the lower tunnel system by 7 a.m., joking about how cold it was and how they hoped the silver veins hadn't dried up. Among them was William Denton, Sarah Denton's brother. He was a strong, no-nonsense man, 27, recently promoted to foreman. William was known for pushing hard and not taking superstition seriously. But even he noticed something strange that morning. As he rode into camp, he saw a single black crow perched on the mine's wooden entrance beam, staring unmoving in the snow. "Bad luck, bird," one miner muttered. William laughed it off, but he couldn't stop looking at it.
A mountain breathing.
The men descended with their lanterns lit and picks ready. Inside, the mountain was quiet, too quiet. Anyone who has worked underground knows a mine has its own sounds. The creak of timbers, the distant echo of footsteps, the soft groan of the earth adjusting. But that day, the mine felt like it was holding its breath. Deep in Tunnel 6, the crew had reached a new silver pocket the week before. The rock was rich but unstable. William had marked it as safe for work, with caution. By mid-morning, most of the men were scattered throughout the lower shaft. They were making good progress, even joking that the mountain must have missed them during inspection week. Then, around 11:42 a.m., the first vibration was felt. The collapse! It was soft at first. Dust fell from above. One man joked it was just the mountain stretching its legs. But then came a loud crack, like a giant bone snapping in the dark. Timbers groaned, lanterns swayed, a cold wind came rushing through the tunnel, though no one could say where it came from. And then the mountain roared. The ceiling came down in waves. Men screamed as rocks the size of barrels tumbled from above. The entire eastern shaft collapsed, trapping workers inside. 17 men had been in the mine that morning.
The rescue begins.
By the time dust cleared and the foreman above ground realised what had happened, chaos had broken loose. Messages were sent by riders to neighbouring camps and towns, including Pine Ridge. Word reached the general store by sunset. Jacob Miller dropped the telegram as he read it. 17 men collapse in Silver Creek. Unknown survivors. Sarah Denton fainted. Within the hour, the news reached Thomas and Margaret Henderson. Margaret looked at Samuel, who was sitting quietly by the fire. "You said it, didn't you?" she whispered. Samuel didn't answer, but he stood, walked to the window, and stared toward the mountains. "It started," he said. "Now they'll listen."
On the ruins!
Back in Silver Creek, rescue efforts went on through the night. The collapsed tunnel was full of unstable rock. Gas pockets made the air poisonous. Every dig had to be careful or more would die. But just before dawn on February 22nd, a voice was heard, weak but alive. Miners dug like mad, clearing a small air pocket where 5 survivors were found. They were bruised, bleeding, and half dead from thirst, but they were alive. One man kept whispering over and over, "The mountain tried to eat us." They were pulled out, barely breathing. 2 more were found before noon.
7 survivors!
10 still missing.
The vision was real!
Back in Pine Ridge, Reverend Matthews called a town meeting. He stood before the congregation, pale and shaken. 17 men were in the mine, he said. 7 have survived. 10 are still missing. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Sarah Denton wept openly. The prophecy had been exact. Samuel had said 17 lives would be touched. He had said the mountain would swallow the greedy and that silver would run red with blood. Every detail had come true. Blackwood's, but not everyone was convinced. Elder Marcus Blackwood stood and slammed his cane on the church floor. "This proves nothing. Evil can predict as well as good. This was no prophecy. This was a trick. A curse." But even as he spoke, parents moved closer to their children. Men exchanged worried looks. The fear wasn't of Samuel anymore. It was of what else might be coming. Samuel's quiet grief. Samuel didn't celebrate. He didn't speak of being right. He sat on the church steps while the town argued about him. Margaret sat beside him and took his hand. "You knew," she said softly, and no one listened. Samuel didn't look at her. They'll listen next time, he said, because this isn't over.
Outro.
7 men lived, 10 didn't. But the real question now was, how did Samuel know? In part 5, we dig deeper into the roots of Samuel's visions and the truth about the sacred place where he was found, what happened there, and what still lives beneath those mountains. If you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. And tell us in the comments, was this divine warning or something far stranger? Here's part 5 of the mystery of Samuel Henderson, crafted for a 30-minute YouTube storytelling video in simple, dramatic American English. This part uncovers the mystery behind the sacred ground where Samuel was found and reveals deeper forces at work. Title: The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, Part 5, The Sacred Place. In the last episode, 17 men entered the Silver Creek mine. 10 didn't return, just as Samuel Henderson predicted. Now, the town of Pine Ridge is left asking one question. How did the boy know? This next chapter takes us back to the Dark Forest Trail where Thomas Henderson found Samuel as a baby. But what he discovered then, he didn't tell anyone until now. If you believe some places hold memories or that the land itself can remember trauma, keep watching. You're not alone. Now let's go back to where it all began, the sacred place.
The beginning of truth.
3 days after the Silver Creek disaster, the snow finally let up. The skies cleared, but Pine Ridge remained frozen in more ways than one. Inside the Henderson home, Thomas could no longer hold his silence. The guilt, the prophecy, the collapse, it had all come to a breaking point. He asked Reverend Matthews to join him at the house. When the Reverend arrived, Thomas sat him down by the fire and poured 2 cups of coffee. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "I never told the truth about the day I found Samuel." Margaret froze. Samuel listened from the hallway. The burned camp. It had been the spring of 1858, Thomas explained. He was out hunting deer west of Pine Ridge, near the base of Whispering Rock Ridge, when he smelled smoke. He followed the trail and came upon a burned-out Ute camp. Not just abandoned, but massacred. 3 adults lay dead, burned, shot, slashed. But what haunted him most wasn't the violence, it was the silence. Everything felt not just death, but desecration. Ritual objects were broken. Sacred stones shattered, and carved into the bark of 3 pine trees were strange symbols. Not Ute, not English, something older. He found the child, Samuel, wrapped in buffalo hide and hidden inside a root cellar beneath the ashes. The boy wasn't a newborn, maybe 18 months old. Eyes open, unblinking, silent. He didn't cry, didn't speak. But when Thomas picked him up, he felt immediate connection, like the child had been waiting for him. He buried the bodies and never told anyone. "I thought I was protecting him," Thomas told the Reverend, "but now I wonder if I was protecting all of us from something we didn't understand."
What was that place?
Later that night, Thomas, Reverend Matthews, and Doctor Who looked at old maps and journals from trappers and Ute sources, and they found something. The location Thomas described matched a site the Utes called Mketuwem, the place of spirits that whisper. It had been sacred ground for generations, a place where medicine men went for visions, and where some believed the boundary between the living and the dead was thinner. It was also the rumoured site of an old blood debt, a place where settlers and soldiers had once slaughtered an entire family of Ute spiritual leaders during a territorial skirmish. According to legend, the land itself was cursed afterward, not by native magic, but by the spiritual imbalance created when sacred ground was turned into a grave. Samuel, just a toddler at the time, had survived that night. But had he seen something? Had something seen him? Thomas sketched the symbols he'd seen on the trees for the Reverend and Dr. Keller. To their shock, Samuel, now standing in the corner, finished the drawings from memory. "I see them in dreams," he whispered. "They're always burning." Reverend Matthews was silent for a long time before saying, "That child came from a place where heaven and hell are too close together." Samuel's quiet revelation. Later that evening, Samuel sat beside his mother. "Mama," he said softly, "the mountain's not done yet." Margaret paused. "You mean more danger?" He nodded. "It remembers what was taken. It wants it back." Margaret asked him, What was taken? Samuel looked out the window toward the dark mountains and whispered, "The silence."
Back in the mine!
Meanwhile, back in Silver Creek, rescue teams continued to dig. On the fifth day, they recovered the bodies of the remaining miners, but 2 bodies were never found. Instead, they discovered something else, a collapsed chamber deeper than any known tunnel. Carved into the rock were markings the miners couldn't explain. Some said they looked like stars, others like eyes. And worst of all, the air down there had changed. Not just gas, stillness, pressure, a feeling. As if the earth itself was watching, the foreman sealed the chamber. No one ever went back.
The Reverend's warning. On the next Sunday.
Reverend Matthews stood before his congregation. His voice trembled, not with fear but with reverence. We live on land that remembers blood. Whether Samuel's gift is divine or something older, we cannot treat it lightly. He looked down at the boy seated in the third pew. This is not just a child. This is a message. The truth about where Samuel came from was darker and deeper than anyone had imagined. But it was only the beginning. Because in part 6, Samuel begins to change, the visions grow stronger, the dreams become real, and someone in Pine Ridge will go missing. Subscribe now and prepare yourself. The mountain is waking. Here is part 6 of The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, written in simple, gripping American English for a 30-minute YouTube storytelling episode. This chapter covers the rise of Samuel's visions and a terrifying disappearance that shatters the calm in Pine Ridge. Title: The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, Part 6, The Boy Who Dreamed and Intro. Last time on The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, the truth came out. Samuel had been found in a burned-out Ute camp on sacred land where the dead were never meant to be disturbed. Now the boy's visions are growing stronger, and the town of Pine Ridge is about to face something far darker than a mine collapse. If you believe some children are born with knowledge no one should have, hit that subscribe button and comment below. Do you believe dreams can be warnings? Because tonight, we step into Samuel's dreams.
Should the changes
begin? It started the night after Reverend Matthews warned the congregation not to take Samuel lightly. Samuel Henderson, now 9 years old, began waking up in the middle of the night. Not crying, screaming in a language no one understood. Margaret tried to comfort him, but he would push her away as if he didn't recognize her. His eyes wide open, staring past her, seeing something else, something far away. When he did fall back asleep, he mumbled strange names and whispered broken phrases. The black crow watches. The tunnels breathe now. She waits in the fire. Margaret started writing the words down. Every night brought more. Dr. Keller's journal. Dr. Ezra Keller had stayed in Pine Ridge longer than planned. Originally, he was just there to treat a winter fever outbreak. Now, he was documenting what he called the most unusual case of predictive trance in American medical history. His journal from March 1st reads, "The child shows no sign of mental illness, trauma-induced hallucination, or epilepsy. His health is perfect, and yet he speaks of people and places he could not know. He describes dreams with details only miners from Silver Creek have witnessed." Keller became obsessed. He visited Samuel daily, conducted tests, and spoke with the Hendersons at length. One afternoon, he showed Samuel a map of the surrounding mountains, without labels. Samuel pointed to one ridge immediately and said, "There's a mouth in the stone, a place where the birds don't fly." When Keller checked the coordinates, his hands shook. It was the location of an old, sealed mine shaft, abandoned after a gas explosion in 1857. The missing boy. On March 4th, tragedy struck Pine Ridge. Nathaniel Cole, aged 10, failed to return home after helping his father gather firewood. At first, the townspeople assumed he had simply wandered too far or gotten lost in the snow, but by sunset, a full search party had gone out. Without success. His coat was found just a mile outside of town, caught on a pine branch. No footprints led away from it. None. Not even his own. Just
gone?
That night, Samuel woke the entire household with another screaming fit. But this time, he was burning hot to the touch. Margaret placed a wet cloth on his forehead, but it steamed. Thomas said the boy felt like a kettle, heat rolling off him in waves. And then Samuel sat straight up in bed, eyes glowing in the lantern light. "He's in the stone's mouth," he said. He followed the voice down, but she doesn't let go. She doesn't forget. When asked who she was, Samuel shook his head slowly. "She is the mountain. She is the hunger."
Panic in Pine Ridge.
The next morning, panic spread across Pine Ridge. News of Nathaniel's disappearance combined with Samuel's outburst sent the town into a spiral. Elder Marcus Blackwood dubbed down, declaring Samuel to be the cause. First, a mine collapse. Now, a child taken. We are under judgment, and that child is the vessel for it. He called a public meeting in the town square, demanding Samuel be banished or worse. But others were beginning to believe Samuel was warning them, not causing harm. "What if he's trying to save us?" asked Martha Caldwell, whose son had died in a mining collapse years earlier. "What if we just don't want to listen?"
Samuel's vision! The crow and the girl!
That afternoon, Samuel entered a deep trance-like sleep. Margaret said she felt the room grow cold. When he awoke, he drew something with charcoal on the back of an old flour sack. It was disturbing. A black crow with fire in its eyes perched on a pile of bones, and beside it, a girl made of ash, her mouth open as if screaming, but no sound came out. Underneath the drawing, Samuel wrote 4 words: "She waits, not alone." Margaret showed the image to Dr. Keller and Reverend Matthews. Neither could explain the detail in the crow's feathers or the hollow look in the girl's eyes. But Reverend Matthews remembered something. The Ute spoke of a spirit, he said, a woman made of flame, a guardian of sacred ground, vengeful, bound to the land. Thomas returns
To the sacred place?
Haunted by all that was happening, Thomas Henderson decided to return to the spot where he'd found Samuel nearly 9 years earlier. He took 2 men with him, Willem Strauss, the old miner, and Jacob Miller, the general store owner. They rode into the forest under grey skies and reached the ridge by late afternoon. The place was just as Thomas remembered it. Dead trees, charred stumps, a silence so thick it pressed on the ears. But the root cellar was gone, covered with fresh rock as if the earth had sealed itself. And carved into a nearby stone was a symbol none of them could explain, a circle with 7 jagged lines crossing through it. Willem turned pale. "I've seen that mark," he whispered, back in the mines years ago. Back in Pine Ridge. That evening, Samuel approached Reverend Matthews during supper. "I didn't see it all before," he said, "but now I do." "See what, Samuel?" "There's a door under the mountain. It was locked, but now it's open." "And what's coming through?" Samuel looked up with eyes far older than a boy should have. Something that remembers fire, something that was promised the bones of children.
Arthur!
A child gone missing, visions growing darker, and a door beneath the mountain now open. What Samuel sees in his dreams is no longer just prophecy, it's invitation. In part 7, Pine Ridge begins to break under pressure, and someone unexpected turns against the Hendersons. Because when truth is too heavy, fear becomes easier to believe. Subscribe if you haven't already, and comment below. Do you believe a place can hold on to pain? We'll see you in the next chapter of The Mystery of Samuel Henderson. Part 7 of The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, crafted for a 30-minute American storytelling video in simple, compelling language. In this chapter, fear divides Pine Ridge, and betrayal emerges from inside the town's trusted circle. Title: The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, Part 7, The Broken Church. Previously on The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, a child went missing. Samuel's dreams grew darker. A drawing of a crow and an ash-covered girl sent chills through the town. And something ancient, sealed beneath the mountains, may now be awake. But what's coming won't be stopped by fear. This is the chapter where faith is tested, where friendships crumble, and where even the church can't hold back what's rising from beneath. Welcome to Part 7.
Broken shaft!
Fear spreads like fire. By the first week of March 1867, Pine Ridge was no longer the quiet mountain town it once was. Neighbours no longer trusted one another. Children were kept inside. Windows were shuttered before sundown. Hunting trips were cancelled. The fear wasn't just about wolves or snowstorms now, it was something deeper, spiritual, unseen, ancient. And at the centre of it all stood a 9-year-old boy with pale green eyes who no longer slept peacefully.
the divided church on Sunday.
The pews of Pine Ridge Presbyterian were full, but no one smiled. Half the congregation stared coldly at the Henderson family. The other half watched Reverend Matthews closely, waiting for answers he didn't have. Then Elder Marcus Blackwood rose from the third pew. He didn't ask permission. He walked straight to the pulpit, and for the first time in town history, he interrupted a sermon. "We have been cursed," he declared, "and the curse sleeps under that boy's skin." A murmur rippled through the church. "You all saw it! The prophecy, the drawing, the burning child. This is not the hand of God, is a trick of darkness." Reverend Matthews stepped forward. "Elder Blackwood, with respect, this is not your pulpit." Blackwood turned to him and raised his voice. "Then speak the truth, Reverend. Has the Lord spoken to you about this child?" The Reverend said nothing. The silence was louder than shouting.
A schism. By nightfall,
Pine Ridge was split in two. The Watchers, as they came to be called, followed Elder Blackwood. They believed Samuel had brought something dangerous into the town, something demonic. They stopped attending services, held their own prayer circles, and began watching the Henderson cabin from a distance. They nailed small crosses into tree trunks, salted the roads. Some whispered of burning the cabin down. On the other side stood the Protectors, a smaller, quieter group led by Sarah Denton, Martha Caldwell, and Dr. Keller. They believed Samuel was a warning, not a threat, that he was suffering, not possessed. They met quietly, prayed often, and promised to keep him safe. The return of Nathaniel Cole, and then, on March 8th, just after sunrise, something impossible happened. A boy was seen walking out of the tree line behind Pine Ridge, frozen, barefoot, covered in dirt and ash. It was Nathaniel Cole, alive. He collapsed in front of his family's cabin, his lips blue, his skin burned, and when he woke, he wouldn't speak. What Nathaniel saw, Dr. Keller and Reverend Matthews examined him. The boy's feet were torn from frostbite, his fingers blistered, but there was no sign of a fall, no animal attack, no reason he should be alive. Samuel entered the room quietly. When Nathaniel saw him, he screamed. "She showed me her face," he cried. "She told me to stay, said the others would come, but the crow broke the mirror and told me to run." That was all he said before collapsing into sleep.
At Margaret's revelation,
That night, Margaret Henderson finally spoke with Reverend Matthews alone. She shared something she had never told Thomas. When Samuel was 3 years old, he used to talk to someone who wasn't there. A woman, he claimed, who lived under the stone. "She sings to me," he used to say. "She has fire in her hair." Margaret dismissed it as childhood imagination until now. The Whispering Stones. Meanwhile, Thomas continued his quiet investigation. He visited an old Ute man named Crow Walker, who lived alone near the northern ridge. When Thomas described the root cellar and the symbol carved in stone, Crow Walker went still. "You should not have taken that child." "We saved him," Thomas replied. "No," the man said. "You carried a door across the valley." And now the mountain remembers. According to Crow Walker, the place where Thomas found Samuel wasn't just sacred. It was a prison. The fire spirit Pelisar, the weeping woman of the deep, had been trapped there long ago by Ute shamans. Her presence was bound to fire, silver, and sacrifice. And she always finds her way back through the eyes of those who survive her flames. Later that week, Thomas returned home to find something missing.
Samuel.
The boy's coat and boots were still by the door, but the window was cracked open. Outside, strange footprints circled the cabin. Some were large, barefoot. Others were animal-like, clawed. Thomas ran to the church to raise the alarm, but he found only Reverend Matthews, seated quietly in the pews, hands clasped. "He's gone," Thomas said. "I know," Matthews whispered. "They took him." "Who?" Matthews looked up. "There were Blackwood's men."
At the hill of fire.
That night, at the edge of the forest, a fire was lit. The Watchers had taken Samuel to a high clearing overlooking the valley. They were going to cleanse him through holy fire. But just before they could begin the ritual, the wind shifted, the fire turned blue, the air grew heavy, and from the darkness of the trees came the sound of wings. A single black crow landed on the altar, then another, then 5, then 20, and then they screamed. not like birds, like people. One of the watchers fell to the ground, clutching his ears. Another ran, eyes wide with terror. Samuel stood still. He wasn't crying, he was smiling.
Outro.
The line between prophecy and possession has vanished. Samuel is no longer the same boy, and the fire spirit, she's awake now. In part 8, the mountain speaks again, and something ancient will rise from beneath the town itself. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because next time, someone will die, and Samuel will name them before it happens. Part 8 of The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, written in simple, engaging American English for a 30-minute YouTube storytelling video. This episode continues the rising tension in Pine Ridge as Samuel begins naming the doomed, and the town learns the mountain is no longer sleeping. Title: The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, Part 8, The Name in the Fire. Previously, Samuel Henderson. The town of Pine Ridge is no longer divided by opinion. It's divided by fear. A child has returned from the mountains with tales of a woman made of fire. A secret group tried to cleanse Samuel, but the mountain had other plans. And now the boy isn't just seeing the future, he's naming the people who won't survive it. If you're still with us, you're not afraid of the dark. But tonight, Samuel says a name, and that person will be dead by morning. Let's begin.
After the fire.
The clearing where the watchers tried to burn Samuel was left in ruins. The fire had gone blue, the birds had screamed, and the ground had cracked open just slightly beneath the altar. When Thomas Henderson and Dr. Keller arrived, they found Samuel unharmed. The watchers, however, were in shock. One man, a farmer named Elijah Baines, couldn't speak. He sat rocking near the edge of the clearing, eyes wide open, whispering, "The crows, the eyes." The eyes were hers. Another had fled into the woods. His body would be found 2 days later, his hands burned and his eyes missing. Reverend Matthews called it a judgment. But no one in Pine Ridge was sure if it had come from God or something else. Samuel's list. That night, Samuel sat alone in the Henderson cabin. He didn't eat, didn't speak, just stared into the fireplace, watching the logs crack and shift. And then he spoke. 3 names, that's all she said. Margaret froze. Who, Samuel? The woman under the stone. He turned his head slowly. First, Elder Marcus Blackwood, Margaret gasped. Second, Jacob Miller, the general store owner. Third, he whispered, almost too soft to hear, you, Reverend.
The death of Blackwood.
And 24 hours later, Elder Marcus Blackwood was dead. He had locked himself in the church, pacing, praying, and demanding answers from heaven. Witnesses heard shouting, weeping, and eventually silence. At sunrise, Reverend Matthews unlocked the church door. Inside, Blackwood was slumped over the altar. His throat burned from the inside out. No smoke, no flame, just blackened skin and ash beneath his fingernails. On the pulpit, scratched into the wood with a blade, were 3 words. She is awake. Blackwood's death shook the town like thunder. The watchers disbanded almost overnight. Their members, frightened, broken, stopped talking in public. Many left Pine Ridge altogether. Reverend Matthews called for a fast and prayer, but few showed up. Even faith had begun to crack under the weight of what was happening. Only one man still was all natural, Jacob Miller. Coincidence, he said. Miners die, fire happens, has just been listening too hard. But behind closed doors, Jacob had grown paranoid. He slept with a Bible under his pillow and kept a shotgun by the door. He never looked Samuel in the eye again. The Reverend's dilemma. Reverend Matthews met privately with Dr. Keller. What are we dealing with here? The Reverend asked. Is this a case of prophecy or possession? Dr. Keller shook his head. I've studied trance states, hysterics, epilepsy. This is none of those. Then what? This is knowledge a child should not have. This is a doorway. The Reverend sat in silence. Samuel named me. I'm third. Do you believe him? Matthews looked down at his hands. I believe the mountain is remembering, and we've all forgotten what it cost to settle here. The letter from Silver Creek. That week, a letter arrived from Silver Creek. It was unsigned, delivered by a rider who didn't stay. Inside was a single sentence. She's been seen in the lower tunnels. According to old legends, miners in Silver Creek had long spoken of a woman in ash, a figure seen moments before explosions, cave-ins, and collapses. The sightings had stopped for nearly a decade. Now they were starting again, and with each appearance a bird was left behind, a crow, dead and scorched.
The dream of the world!
That night, Samuel had another vision. He didn't wake up screaming this time. Instead, he spoke while asleep, his voice low and steady. Margaret wrote down every word. There's a well beneath the parsonage. It's sealed with prayer, but the roots are cracking, and what was bound is breaking. The fire doesn't need a match, it needs a memory. The next day, Reverend Matthews returned to his study and lifted the rug. There, beneath the boards, was an old stone well, sealed with an iron grate. Carved into the stone was a symbol, a circle crossed by 7 jagged lines. The same symbol Thomas had seen near Samuel's origin site. Jacob Miller's there. 3 days after Samuel spoke the names, Jacob Miller went missing. His store was found empty. His horse still tied outside. Inside, the floor was scorched. The windows blackened, but no fire had spread. Nothing was burned, except Jacob's boots, found in the centre of the store, with smoke still rising from them. He was never seen again. The town believed he had been taken. But Margaret believed something else. He was given, she whispered, given to repay a debt. The Reverend's final vision of this chapter came not to Samuel, but to Reverend Matthews. In his sleep, he saw Pine Ridge buried under ash. The church collapsed, the mountain split open, and walking through the smoke was a child. Not Samuel, not anyone he knew, a child with eyes made of flame. Your time is almost up, the figure said. She has one more name to call. Matthews woke up drenched in sweat. The clock read 3:33 a.m. The well beneath the parsonage was humming. The fire is spreading. Samuel is no longer the only one dreaming, and the line between prophecy and punishment is almost gone. In part 9, the town will learn the true cost of ignoring sacred land, and Samuel will speak one final name. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and comment below. Do you think Samuel was meant to save Pine Ridge or destroy it? We'll find out soon in The Mystery of Samuel Henderson. Here's part 9 of The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, written in simple American English for a 30-minute YouTube storytelling video. This is the penultimate chapter, the one where secrets are revealed, the past comes back with fire, and Pine Ridge is forced to face the truth it buried.
Title: Mystery of Samuel Henderson.
Part 9, the final warning.
Intro.
Previously on The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, 2 men are dead, 1 is missing. Samuel's prophecies have come true, and now the Reverend knows he's next. A sealed well lies beneath the church, a fiery woman stalks the tunnels of Silver Creek, and the mountain, once silent, is rumbling. Now, with only one name left to speak, Samuel gives the town a final warning, and the truth of what happened in 1858 will finally come to light. This is part 9, the final warning. A town on the edge. By mid-March of 1867, Pine Ridge was a town on edge. Fewer than 300 people remained. Half the watchers had left after Elder Blackwood's death. The others no longer met. They kept quiet, locked their doors, slept with weapons nearby. The protectors stayed close to the Hendersons. They prayed, waited, watched Samuel more closely than ever. The church was nearly empty each Sunday, and through it all, Reverend Matthews, once the town's spiritual anchor, had stopped preaching entirely. He now spent most of his days in the cellar beneath the parsonage, staring at the old sealed well. Samuel, once full of visions, had fallen quiet. No more names, no drawings, no warnings. He sat by the fire most days, staring into the flames with eyes that looked older than they should. He hadn't spoken in nearly 5 days when one night he whispered just one sentence. "She is waiting for your answer." Margaret begged him to explain, but the boy closed his eyes and slept.
Reverend Matthews confesses.
On March 18th, Reverend Matthews asked Thomas Henderson and Dr. Keller to meet him privately. What he shared would change everything. He admitted that back in 1858, months before Pine Ridge was officially founded, he had led a small group of settlers, including Thomas, to clear a sacred site once used by the Ute people for vision ceremonies. It was the place where Samuel had later been found. But Reverend Matthews confessed something darker. They had not just stumbled across a burned camp. We started that fire, he said, not to hurt anyone, but to drive them out. We believed the land was ours by divine right. Thomas's face turned pale. You said you found the camp already destroyed. Matthews looked away. I lied. That same night, Samuel finally spoke again. The town had gathered in the church, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But Samuel walked quietly to the front, climbed the steps to the pulpit, and turned to face the silent pews. His voice was steady. She says the list was incomplete. There is one more name. The room tensed. Samuel looked directly at Thomas Henderson. You were there. You helped seal the fire with blood. Now the debt is yours. Margaret gasped. Thomas stood slowly. His voice was shaking. Samuel, I saved you. Samuel shook his head. You took me, but the fire wasn't meant for me, and for me, it was meant to stay.
You brought it here, Mark, child.
Samuel raised his sleeve. Carved into his arm, fresh, red and burning, was the symbol of the mountain spirit, a circle crossed by 7 jagged lines. It hadn't been carved by hand, it had risen from beneath his skin. The mountain remembers, Samuel said, and it's coming for what was taken. Reverend Matthews collapsed onto the steps. He wept like a man whose soul had finally broken. God forgive us, he whispered. We called it progress. You called it prophecy, Samuel said, but it was always a curse.
Ash, the letter from Silver Creek.
2 days later, March 20th, another letter arrived from Silver Creek. This time it wasn't anonymous. It was from Sarah Denton's brother, William, a miner. The letter was burned around the edges, as if it had nearly been destroyed by fire. It read, people are disappearing. Tunnels collapsing without warning. Miners screaming about a woman who appears before the cave-ins. We found an old shaft yesterday, one we'd never seen before. Carved into the stone was that strange mark you described. I don't know what this is, but it's following the silver. The well opens! That night, thunder rolled across the valley, but there were no clouds. The townspeople felt it more than heard it, a vibration in the walls, in the floorboards, in their bones. The Henderson cabin shook so violently that Margaret fell from her chair. Samuel didn't move. It's opening, he said. Over in the parsonage, Reverend Matthews stared down into the old well. The grate had cracked. A blue light pulsed from beneath, and then a voice, not loud, not shouting, but ancient. You built your homes on stolen fire, it said. Now the fire comes home. The flight from Pine Ridge, by dawn, dozens of families began to flee. They packed wagons, saddled horses, carried children, but when they reached the mountain pass, they found it blocked. A landslide, triggered during the night, had destroyed the only road out. It wasn't natural. The trees along the edge of the landslide were burned black from the inside out. There would be no escape, not yet. As the people returned to Pine Ridge, panic set in. Some locked themselves inside. Others begged Reverend Matthews to pray with them. And then, in the middle of it all, Samuel walked to the church steps. He raised his voice, louder than anyone had heard him speak. The fire has waited long enough. Tomorrow she rises, and only those who return what was taken will survive. The mountain is waking, the past is returning, and the debt of blood is about to be paid. In part 10, the chilling conclusion, Pine Ridge will face the truth, and not everyone will survive it. If you've come this far, you're not just a listener, you're a witness. Subscribe now, because next time, everything burns.
Would you like...
Here's the final episode of The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, written in simple, engaging American English for a 30-minute YouTube storytelling video. This is the chilling end of the 10-part mystery horror series. Everything has been building to this. Title, The Mystery of Samuel Henderson, Part 10, The Ashes of Pine Ridge. Intro previously on The Mystery of Samuel Henderson. 3 men are dead, 1 is missing. The mountain has opened. A sacred well has cracked beneath the church. And Samuel, the boy saved from fire, has revealed the truth. The fire was never meant to be rescued. It was meant to be buried. Now, on the final day, Pine Ridge will learn what happens when the past is ignored. And the mountain calls back what was stolen. This is part 10, The Ashes of Pine Ridge. Let's begin. Dawn, March 21st, 1867. The town of Pine Ridge woke to silence. No birds, no wind. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. The well beneath the church was now glowing with a steady blue light, pulsing like a heartbeat. Samuel hadn't spoken since the night before. He sat on the church steps in his worn wool coat, staring at the ridge where the silver road began. Reverend Matthews stood beside him, holding a Bible and shaking. "Is this the end?" he whispered. Samuel answered softly. "No, Reverend, it's just the truth."
The people gather.
By mid-morning, nearly every soul in Pine Ridge had gathered near the church. They came not for worship, but out of fear, curiosity, desperation. Margaret Henderson, pale and tired, stood protectively behind Samuel. Thomas, still grappling with guilt, clutched his worn leather journal, the one he had used to record every word Samuel had ever spoken. Dr. Ezra Keller stood off to the side, recording notes, trying to make sense of the impossible. And at exactly 12 noon, as the sun reached its peak, the earth moved. The mountain breaks. It started with a crack like thunder underfoot. The ground near the well split open with a sound that no human voice could imitate. Flames, blue and white, rose without burning. Then came the voice, female, ancient, not loud but unshakable. "You buried the blood, you buried the names, you buried the truth. Now you will carry it." The fire rose into the sky, then turned into a shape, a woman, no face, no feet, just fire and black hair that flowed like smoke. Samuel stood slowly. "Her name," he said, "is Ashkana. She was the last spirit guardian of the sacred silver grounds, and we took everything from her." True story of Samuel. Then Samuel turned to the crowd and spoke the truth, clearly, as if reading from something only he could see. "I was not born in fire, I was hidden from it. The men who came to the Ute site in 1858 did not find a burned camp. They created it. Ashkana tried to protect the silver spirit ground. The settlers killed her kin and sealed her beneath the earth with stones, prayers, and blood. I am not her child. I am her warning." Margaret collapsed to her knees. "Then, who saved you?" Samuel turned to her gently. "You did. You taught me kindness, but I was never yours." Ashkana hovered above the well, silent now. Then the light grew brighter, and the town, one building at a time, began to burn, not with red flame, but cold blue fire rising from the foundations. Strangely, the fire didn't spread by wood or wind. It went only to certain places: the store where Jacob Miller once lied, the homes of the watchers who tried to burn the boy, the cabin where Blackwood prayed curses into Samuel's name. Each site lit up, then crumbled to ash. The people screamed, but no one could stop it, and then it stopped, just as suddenly as it began. Only a handful of buildings remained: the church, the schoolhouse, the Henderson cabin, and the parsonage above the sealed well. The last words of Reverend Matthews. Reverend Matthews stepped forward. His face was wet with tears. "I was wrong. I thought we could build a holy place on stolen ground." He knelt before the spirit and opened his Bible. "Forgive us?" Ashkana's form flickered, and for a moment the fire whispered like a woman's voice. "Truth is the only offering." Then the fire touched Matthews. He did not scream. He simply vanished, leaving only his Bible, charred and cracked, on the church steps. Samuel's departure. The fire returned to the well. The earth trembled once more, and Ashkana began to sink back into the ground. Samuel stood still as stone. "She will sleep again," he said. "But only if the truth remains." Margaret reached for him, tears running down her cheeks. "Will you stay?" He smiled, softly, sadly. "I was never meant to stay. I was just the message." With that, he walked into the church one last time. When the townspeople entered moments later, he was gone. No tracks, no sign of where he had gone. Only his coat remained, folded neatly on the front pew. Aftermath. In the weeks that followed, Pine Ridge slowly rebuilt, but it was never the same. Of the 300 who once lived there, only 217 remained. The mines of Silver Creek, shut down after a sudden cave-in, took the lives of 26 men, many of them the ones who had refused to listen. Ashkana was never seen again. The well was resealed, with no prayers this time, just truth. A plaque was placed in front of the church, carved in granite. "Here we remember the price of forgetting." 1973, over 100 years later, a Denver estate sale turned up a locked chest. Inside were letters, journals, and drawings belonging to Dr. Ezra Keller. Among them was a final note. The boy was never the danger. The danger was how easily we ignored him. The journals disappeared from public record a year later. Some say a university bought them. Others say the government took them. No one knows for sure, but one letter remained in the family. It ends with a single line: "If the fire ever returns, listen to the children." Outro, that was The Mystery of Samuel Henderson. 10 parts, one truth. The past is never gone, it's just waiting to be remembered. If you stayed with us to the end, you're not just a listener, you're part of this story now. Comment below. Do you believe Samuel was sent to warn or to judge? And remember, when the mountain speaks, listen. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and never forget the ashes of Pine Ridge.